Hello and welcome! It's good to be back talking about Magnus Protocol, and I'm sorry that this video is a little bit late. We had a hurricane that hit where I live, and it knocked out our power for about 3/4 of the week. But power's back now, and so we get to talk Magnus. And I'm excited for this episode. We have some really cool stuff to talk about, and a little bit that ties into the alchemy stuff that I've been studying for the sake of the ARG video. So, really excited to get to talk about that. But first off, episode 21, Breaking Ground. So, the classification for this one is CAT to RB C4 254-040-1198-1204-2024. Architecture, landmark / corruption, entropy, which is such a cool way to word that. We have so much to talk about here. So, Sam, he's getting some doubts about the OAR. He's not sure that he even wants to still keep working with them, and Celia's doing her best to cheer him up. And also, it feels like keep him around, whether out of a genuine like for him, like feelings for him, or just, hey, he's useful. It's kind of hard to say. But she's also super sweet here, and just the idea of, I'm gonna hear her saying beep beep in my head. There's always the beep beep. It's wonderful. Sam makes a joke about a psycho goat monster, thus meaning that at some point in this series, there's going to be a psycho goat monster. But there's a really interesting thing here. Now, again, if you don't know anything about Magnus Archives, this might not mean anything to you at all. But if you do, when Celia talks about her complicated immigration status, like, sure, okay, yeah, she mentions that Jack doesn't have that. And then she says that Jack can't go back with her if she goes back. Which means Hilltop Road, right? Could she theoretically just go back whenever she wants? But she can't take Jack back with her. Why? Is he bound to this reality? Is there a specific reason he can't go back? Is it because maybe he's been marked by a fear? Like one of the splintered off fears, or whatever they've become, basically, and now can't go back to a world where they don't exist. There's so much to extrapolate and theorize on just from that one line. The idea of like, hey, now that you've been touched by what the entities have become, by what they've been bound to, or by the fractured state of them or whatever, you literally cannot exist in a universe where they don't now. And that's just one theory, right? I'm sure all of you will have a bunch in the comments. I have not looked up any other theories yet. I wanted to go into this untainted. I didn't want to be tainted by any other reviews or any other theories. So, after that, we get our statement, which we're going to find out at the end of the episode, of course, is a statement that was originally meant for Sam, and that Freddy is feeding him these statements about the Institute, and that Alice is trying to take care of him and look out for him, and she deletes the statement. But this statement is super cool. So this is about the Millennium Dome, right? It is about the Millennium Exhibition and the dome, or as some people call it, the Millennium Tent or the Millennium Canopy, that actually exists in our world in the UK. In this world, it has kind of a sinister swing to it. And where this gets really cool is that this is from Mr. Leonardo Kinnings, co-treasurer of the Magnus Institute, who is very clearly an alchemist. So also is Dr. Welling, as we're going to get into. But he brings up a bunch of really cool stuff alchemy-wise. So, Kinnings thinks that Welling's work on the dome is going to divert the great work, and that it's too early for the great ritual, the grand ritual, and it is wrong. And he thinks that because the dome Welling's work is based on the future, and specifically the terror of the future. Welling says that it's supposed to be based on like the changing of the times and the cultural shift in people as the year 2000 comes up. The cultural consciousness is going to give it power, is his argument. But what Kennings thinks, the treasurer, the co-treasurer, is that there is more fear than there is hope, and that there will not be a balance that would allow for a good transmutation, but instead that it will shift things towards fear, which is very interesting. And like I said, there's a lot to talk about here. Oh man, where do I even start? Okay. The idea of the fear of the future is already super cool. And like, does that go into the vast? Does that go into the end? I would feel like that might be the end, but in some cases that could also be the extinction. As we know, those properties don't really stick anymore, right? The way that they used to. Things are broken up more now and a little bit more distinct in there. But specifically, this fear of the future comes from a stagnation of nations as the USSR has dealt with the Iron Curtain falling and everything going on there, and the stagnation of the idea that this is the end of history, which, you know, I don't talk about my age very often. I was around for the Y2K scare, right? There definitely was a lot of fear in some people that it was the end of history, that we were, after the dawn of the 2000s, mankind would continue as it had, and there would be no great innovations, there would be no great changes, and everything would slowly decay. Which is very important for this, because that is the fear that this dome in the Magnus protocol seems to amplify. Now, Kennings mentions a lot of really cool stuff here. And the first big one is that he doesn't think culture, and specifically like cultural consciousness, should be the focus of alchemy. And he says, or specifically he talks about the great work, but it is alchemy, right? The great work is alchemy's grand design. It is the thing that alchemy is pushing towards. Most people know it as the Philosopher's Stone, but more specifically, I'm going to pull up my notes here so I get this right, because I've taken a lot of notes about this. Let me see here. So we're not going to dig into all of it right now because there's a lot. There's a whole lot. There's so much research I've already done, and there's so much more I still need to do, because alchemy is both alchemy and hermeticism, right? The two ideals that started with Hermes Trismegistus, and the way that they have changed over time. Alchemy being the more chemistry aspected and focused version of it, Hermeticism being the more esoteric focus of it, but the two were never completely separate, right? That's why we have chemistry today as its own thing that comes from a lot of what was done in alchemy, but it is distinct from alchemy because of Hermeticism. And the great work of alchemy, according to Hermeticism, is to perfect the human body, the human, both body and soul, whereas the great work, according to alchemy, to historical alchemy, is to transmute lesser metals or materials into greater or more noble metals or materials. Now, when we get into what Kennings says here about how he doesn't think that you can rely on Y2K and culture because non-Gregorian calendars don't have a year 2000 as like the last stop, as it were, right? But instead that we should believe in the stars and focus on the astrological side of things, because as he puts it, the stars are eternal and unchanging. That feels more to me like he is leaning towards the hermetical side of things. And so this feels more like a Philosopher's Stone for the sake of perfecting man. More of a John D. Hey, I'm going to use the Philosopher's Stone to speak to angels so I can become as good as God, versus a Nicholas Flamel, I'm going to use the Philosopher's Stone to become immortal, or Hohenheim, I'm going to use the Philosopher's Stone to transmute lead into gold. And I know we're getting deep into the weeds here, right? Look, it gets deep, okay? But because he talks about a unity of purpose, I think something is very different about alchemy in the Magnus Protocol. And what personal opinion, my own theory on it is that the alchemists are united in the Institute. That it is the Magnus Institute, probably made by Albertus Magnus, that, or started by him at least, that has brought the alchemists together so that they have a unity of purpose. Because Kenning specifically mentions that he knows that a unity of purpose is what is needed. He states he's not trying to reignite the old schisms. And what he's talking about there are that there were many schools of alchemy over all of history, and a lot of different arguments as to which one was the true alchemy, what the real Philosopher's Stone was. To this day, alchemy is not like a single thing that people do. It is a bunch of different diverse teachings from different schools. Some focused more on the metals and minerals and things like that, and some focused more on the hermetics and the esoteric. And there's specifically a comment in here made by Kennings about how we should not discard the stars the same way we discarded the Christian God. And so that shows from what I was talking about before, when you had Isaac Newton and Boyle and Thomas Aquinas, how you get from the good science of alchemy to current day alchemy, which even the good science still had a lot of rituals and secrets in it that weren't exactly Christian, but you're so far beyond that now, right? It feels like it has fully become the hermeticism style of alchemy here, where we're looking to tap into that which is beyond, right? I say all of that because I know I've been talking for like 6 minutes about this, and some of you just don't care. But I say all of that to say that I think Welling is attempting to use this to create or to transmute a Philosopher's Stone. And it doesn't seem like it worked. It could have, but it seems like instead this might have been the ritual on the other side of things that pulled the fears here, or it might have been the ritual that splintered them. Or it could have been the ritual that strengthened them to the point where more excessive measures were made. We're going to have to see what comes of this, but I feel like this did not do at all what Welling wanted it to do, unless Welling was trying to work against the Institute. Kennings specifically talks about how Welling forgot to take in the stagnation and end of history that I mentioned earlier, and how the site of the dome was a gaswork, which it really was in history, and that the soil is still toxic. He mentions that there's a fear evident in the foreman, who says that, well, you just never know what's going to happen. And then you see a copy of a man come out of the dirt and drag him back in, and the copy of the man is older, so he's from the future. And is that trying to say that the fear is that in the future they'll all just be dirt? And so it pulled him out? Is this the buried? Are we adding time differences now into the spatial differences? Because we already had that a little bit with the extinction and with some of the other ones. Just, whoa, immediate, so cool. Again, there's a lot to talk about in this episode. I know we're already like 15 minutes in almost, and we're not even done with the statement to get into what happens later, but just the idea that Kennings saw this happen, and even in his notes is like, you know, because I'm writing to all of you, I know that you'll understand, so I'm just going to tell you what I saw. And then just goes right back to surveying the scene like nothing happened. Clearly, the Magnus Institute is doing things in this time that are not okay. Celia might have been right about it needing to be burned. That's all I'm saying. So, after that, Kennings just wraps it up, says, this is not a good spot. It's shifted too much to this. It's not going to work. I hope that you'll listen to me, which is my hope every time I make one of these videos. But also, I hope you'll put up with my they're not ramblings. They weren't incoherent ramblings. They did have a purpose, but I know they might have felt that way. So I hope you'll put up with those. We get back into outside of the case, right? Back into the OIR. And as I mentioned, Alice has taken this bullet for Sam, as it were, and she's very upset with Freddy because she knows what's happening now. Freddy is 100% trying to lead Sam down this road. And then Lena comes in, and Freddy, by the way, is still buzzing for lies. Lena comes in and tries to lie and say she's not worried. She absolutely is worried about Gwen. But she makes a comment of how she thinks the system is running better without Colin, which means Colin definitely was keeping something in check. And I assume that something is Freddy. I have, for the entirety of the protocol so far, believed that Freddy was a good guy because he has John and Martin's voices. I don't necessarily think that's true now. I don't know if Freddy is actually trying to help them or if Freddy is trying to push Sam to something. But from here, we cut to Gwen, who is running for her life. Inksoul is after her, and a man on the street tries to help Gwen, but Inksoul makes the barbed wire tattoo on his arm cut off his arm. And then there's just this moment, right, where I'm listening to this episode, I'm taking my notes, I've got the transcript up, I'm reading as I go because I don't want to spoil myself on what I'm hearing. And Gwen just starts talking, and my brain goes, because I have the whole script in front of me. I can see that it's on a tape recorder. My brain goes, oh, that's being pulled out of her. And then the figure comes forward wearing a cloak of whispers, and when they speak, you hear the ba-na of the Magnus archives sound, like the intro. I can't do it with my voice, but you hear it, and my heart twisted in my chest, and I went, oh, it's John. Oh, it's John, isn't it? But it could be somebody else. It could be. And I want to get back to what Gwen's talking about here real quick, because Gwen gives the start of a statement about a rotting fox in a garden shed that she wasn't supposed to go into, and about the fleshy tendrils reaching for it. So has Gwen been marked by the flesh? But Gwen runs off when Inksoul finally releases Gwen, when Error says, mine, all of them mine. And then Error doesn't go after Gwen. I'm saying Error because that's what Beth Eyre is listed as the voice of in the post and also in the script, right? But instead tells Inksoul that there are more, not here but elsewhere, and leaves. And when Inksoul tries to pick up the tape recorder, it bites them. So this archivist, whoever they are, is out there hunting, feeding, and decided to save Gwen. I don't feel like by accident, because there was a tape recorder there. So why did they save Gwen? And then the comment of not here elsewhere, is that talking about the rest of the OIR? Is it because Gwen smelled like the OIR, or because Gwen had been around Sam and Alice, who were the ones that freed this archivist? I'm assuming it's an archivist. I don't know it's an archivist. But just, there's so much in this episode, between the comments about how Jack couldn't go back with Celia, to everything with the aspected to fear dome and the man from the mud and the alchemist working together, and it seeming like they're united in the Institute, to this Error that is cloaked in whispers, that, oh, There's so much. And I wanted to mention real quick, if you're like, what do you mean all the schools of alchemy working together? Let me just throw this list of you. This is a short list. It is not the complete list of different schools of alchemy. So we have Hellenistic Egyptian alchemy, which has a bunch of different ways to follow it right there, right? We have Greek alchemy. We have Islamic alchemy, or some people say Arabic alchemy. There's a couple different ways to get to it, or a couple different names that it's referred to, right? Rasayana, let me make sure I get that right, which is Indian alchemy. There's Chinese alchemy. There's medieval alchemy. There's current alchemy. There's pure Hermeticism. There's Gnostic Hermeticism. There's the alchemy that's referred to often as John Dee's, but it's really Edward Kelly's. There's Roger Bacon's alchemy, Paracelsus's alchemy. There's so many different schools of it. And the fact that here Kennings talks about them being united makes me think that it must have been under someone like Albertus Magnus. There are only two other names that I could think of that would have been able to unite alchemy. The other one being Geber, whose actual name I have it written down here. Let me make sure I'm historically accurate. Geber's actual name is Jabir ibn Hayyan, and the other one being Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim. Other than them, I don't know who else would have been able to like bridge it all together. And so I'm really leaning on Albertus Magnus. Now, of course, this is a different world. Someone else could have been behind it. And maybe I'm just bringing in too much of our world's history of alchemy into this. There could be alchemists that I've never heard of in this series because they don't exist in our world. But the fact that we have the Millennium Exhibition here makes me think that's probably not the case. So if you feel like I'm digging too deep into it, forgive me, please, because I cannot help myself. Let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comment section down below. Were there any theories that jumped out to you? Anything you noticed? One last little thing I wanted to mention is that Lena is absolutely worried about Gwen, and I don't know what Gwen is going to be like when she gets back. Not only was she attacked by Inksoul, and Inksoul started to ink scorpions onto her, but also she was compelled by error. And you just never know for sure what that's going to do to somebody. I mean, look at what some of John's victims wound up being like. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum. Magnus Protocol. As off.